All right, let's turn to the domestic front. Some big news also from President Biden last week. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So this is a fulfilling of a campaign pledge he made. This is from the AP. They say Biden pardons thousands for simple possession of marijuana. Let me read you some of the details here. So President Biden pardoning those Americans convicted of simple possession of marijuana under federal law, and that's important, as his administration takes a dramatic step, they say, toward decriminalizing the drug and addressing charging practices that disproportionately impact people of color. His move also covers thousands convicted of the crime in D.C., and he is calling on governors to issue similar pardons for those convicted of state marijuana offenses, which reflect the vast majority of marijuana possession cases. The real news here, I think, because ultimately there's no one in federal prison for simple possession of marijuana. Now, this will be significant for people who have convictions and they're struggling to get jobs or housing or those sorts of things. It will be helpful ultimately for them. But I think the biggest, most significant news here is that he also is looking at rescheduling marijuana. He's directing the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Attorney General to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Rescheduling the drug would reduce or potentially eliminate criminal penalties for possession. Currently, marijuana is a Schedule I drug, so it's alongside things like heroin and LSD, which is insane, but it is ahead of fentanyl and methamphetamine. The White House didn't set a timeline for the review. So ultimately, that would be the biggest and most significant shift in terms of drug policy if it was ultimately rescheduled. And it also is worth saying, I mean, this is a dramatic departure from how Biden has approached marijuana and every other substance throughout the entirety of his career. I mean, he really prided himself on being a drug warrior. Of course, we all know he's very involved in that 1994 Federal Sentencing Act. So he has been very, very tough. And even his own administration, remember, they tossed down a bunch of people who had been like, who had smoked weed. They were like, fired for admitting that they had ultimately smoked weed. So this is a really significant philosophical, I think, shift for Biden. I would say undertaken under pressure based on a campaign promise and with the understanding that the midterms are coming up. And this is a very clear political winner here. I mean, the polling on this is clear. Let's go ahead and put this morning consult poll up on the screen. 60% of voters say marijuana should be made legal entirely. So that's going way further than Biden is going here with this order, compared with only 27% who say it should not be. And Saagar, this is really across demographics. Even Republicans, that's plurality support. Even among the oldest demographics, it's plurality support. And it's most popular among young people. You're talking about like 70% support and only 17% oppose among young voters, and also among Black voters as well. So for people who care about this, it's a significant issue, and it's just like such a clear political winner that it's kind of astonishing it hasn't been done yet.
It is interesting, you know, much to my chagrin, that all of this is happening. I do want to reiterate that there is not a single person in federal prison for simple marijuana possession. I will not deny that there are horrific, unjust tragedies that have happened over the years at the state level, of which I've always made clear I'm 100% against. I do not think anybody should be in jail for marijuana possession. I do think that the HHS thing is going to be interesting. So I read up a little bit about this, which is that the reality is that HHS civil servants are the ones who are in charge of this decision. They are required by federal law to review the scheduling of marijuana and all controlled substances every 5 to 10 years, of which 8 factors of analysis must be required to meet to deschedule. Marijuana has never reached those has quote unquote failed on all of those factors around the way that the definitions have said regarding harm, et cetera. Now, I don't even disagree that Schedule I status, especially given what's not Schedule I, doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Totally insane.
I am fully I want to be very, very clear. The reason why that this matters from a bureaucratic point of view is that the HHS recommendation is actually binding for the Department of Justice. So this isn't really something that you can just do without you essentially need whoever the equivalent of like the parliamentarian of the HHS is. That guy or those guys and girls have to sign off before the DOJ were to make anything. Now, of course, the DOJ can also change its policy about what it will and will not prosecute, but I'm speaking specifically on what the overall policy is. And I also will say part of why I'm deeply skeptical of all of this is I think all of this is being done on behalf of the marijuana industry, of which is completely unregulated, and of which there have been insane it's essentially like the supplement industry. You have no idea what you're getting. Just reiterate, my friend Andrew Huberman, he's got a great podcast on cannabis, which I recommend everybody go and listen to. I'm not going to sit here and say it's safe. I don't think alcohol is safe either. Personally, I don't even drink alcohol anymore. I just want people to know that for a lot of the claims that the industry is making is really all about money. They want marijuana descheduled so that they can make a shit ton of money by selling it commercially and use the commercial banking system. A lot of people don't know this, but originally the way because marijuana is still federally illegal and Schedule I drug, they're not eligible for a lot of banking services.
Right.
So they have like special marijuana banks, and it's also a high cash industry. That means that they don't get loans. They're basically cut off from like the normal financial system, almost like OnlyFans also was. They want that removed so they can make a ton of money. There's a lot of venture capitalists, corporate, and even Pfizer and the big drug companies that are eyeing this as a multi-billion-dollar thing. I think it would be the worst thing possible in order for that to happen. So I've eventually come around to some form of, if it's gonna be legal, I think it should have to be nonprofit. There are a couple of countries and other places where they have taken profit completely out of it, and they make it so, on a couple levels. A, you know what you're getting. B, you're not like using deceptive advertising in order to target children. And C, which is that anytime profit is involved in drugs, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that things are bad.
Yeah.
And I say the alcohol industry is perhaps one of the biggest killers in the United States, and that's a whole
tobacco
situation.
as well. I mean, I support that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, your issue really is with capitalism, not with
I'm saying it.
availability of marijuana, directly. And there are models within the U.S. too that are promising. So we talked about in Rhode Island, they have, I think this got passed. They have sort of landmark legislation that would enable their licensing to marijuana businesses. There's some percentage that would have to be co-ops. Mm-hmm. So there are sort of models that can be employed to make sure, it's got to be regulated. Obviously, the illegal black market for marijuana right now is not regulated at all, and it can be laced with all sorts of things which are even more dangerous. So that's a really bad situation. Overall, obviously, I think this is a really positive potential step forward. We'll see what happens with the rescheduling. Being Schedule I right now is completely, it's just totally insane. No one would say that marijuana is as addictive or dangerous as heroin, for one very clear example. There have been, people who have found medical benefits from marijuana as well. So I think it's really interesting from a political perspective, too, that Biden is reaching for this just before the midterms, because it does show you what a dramatic shift in public opinion there has been on this issue over the course of just the past 2 decades. I mean, when just very recently, public opinion was completely on the other side of this issue. And now you have even some red states which have at least decriminalized marijuana. It's become a very mainstream position. So as I said, I think it's kind of surprising that no one politically has reached for this previously, when Biden obviously, he's still the same guy that he's always been, but he sees, both with this and I think with the student loan debt cancellation as well, where the numbers are, where his campaign promises were, and what it could ultimately do for him in the midterms. I found this was just a little element for this block up on the screen. I thought this was interesting in a Walker-Warnock focus group. So the bulk of this article from our friend Dan Marins is about, how people are responding to the various Herschel Walker scandals and how they're thinking about that race. But there was this one little note in here that I thought was really interesting. They were interviewing this one woman, and she said she was neutral on Biden because she appreciates the student loan forgiveness, but at the same time is struggling with inflation and nervous about the declining value of her investments. And they have this little side note in here that Biden's forgiveness of student loans and steps to decriminalize marijuana were his most popular policies among the participants, who ranged in age from younger to middle-aged adults. These were all people who were they were swing voters. I think they were folks who had voted for Biden, but also voted for Kemp. It was something like that. They'd divided their votes between Republicans and Democrats. And these 2 policies actually seem to land most with them. Now, it's a focus group, it's a small group of voters, et cetera, et cetera. But I did think it was kind of an interesting note. These sorts of things which no one would rank it, very few people would rank as like their #1 issue, they can be disproportionately impactful and motivating for the group of voters that really, really ultimately care or are impacted
That's
by
what
it.
Michael Moore always used to say. I think it's gonna be a good test case. I cannot wait for the election results to come in. Is a youth vote gonna be up or down? Let's see. It's a perfect test of like everybody said for years, if you do this, then the young people will come out and vote. This one's not as one-to-one, but I think student loan is pretty one-to-one. Let's figure it out. If it's actually true, if it's not, then we can reform our talking about how exactly it will all work out. I'm genuinely pretty skeptical just because of where the polls and all that stuff have moved. And some people anecdotally say a lot of things. Are they really going to break their voting pattern and actually come out to vote? I don't know. I mean, does anybody really care about weed enough in order to come specifically for a possible descheduling in a couple of years? I'm deeply skeptical. That's why I think that the student loan one is a good test case of like, are you going to come out and vote or not?
I think it's more, people get this sense of like, people who are more progressive or who are directly impacted by this policies, they just get a little bit more of a sense of like, okay, he's doing some stuff. It creates a more generally positive impression of him for a certain group of voters. Now, I continue to think the most important things are going to be inflation in the economy and the fact that gas prices are probably going back up. I still think that, gives Republicans a significant edge ultimately, but I did think it was interesting that that was something that was brought up by those focus group participants. We're going to talk to Kyle Kondik today. It's also interesting that Republicans really, I think when the student loan debt forgiveness thing happened, they really thought they had maybe a winning issue on their hands. They're not running any ads on it, but neither are Democrats. I mean, it's basically in terms of the ad wars not being focused on at all. So that's kind of an interesting note as well. Yeah. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.